Is the sun conscious?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's crazy to think otherwise. It's much smarter than us. Yeah, what's the sun want to do with the earth? That's kind of the big question. Like, what's it want to do to us? The sun can send off a blast of plasma, which then triggers an earthquake under a certain place, and perhaps it's doing it for a reason. Consciousness can shift unlike anything else. There's a big test, and if we don't pass the test, it's only our own fault. There doesn't have to be any time at all. You can have an instant consciousness shift if you want to, if you reach that level of enlightenment. I think maybe this year or next year, we're actually going to see a wave of personal declarations of independence.
Hello friends, welcome back to World Astrology Report and to the second of what will be a series of monthly long-form interviews with special guests. I'm incredibly excited about today's guest because he's a friend of mine and we've been talking about doing this for a long time already. He's geophysicist Stefan Burns, who runs a YouTube channel of the same name, which is doing incredibly well right now. Stefan's videos are reports on space weather and geophysical phenomena, but what makes this channel unique is that he's also a very spiritual person who even brings astrology into his work. If you're looking for the union of science and spirit, well, look no further than Stefan. In our conversation, we get into everything from how solar cycles affect human beings and why astrologers should be paying more attention to them, to the connection between the sun and consciousness, to nuclear weapons, the AI-driven technological control grid, and to prophecies of a tsunami that will supposedly hit East Asia in July. Please do give this video a like and register your support for what we're doing on this channel. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notifications button, which will keep you aware of new videos on World Astrology Report. Oh, and there is also an extended version of this video for members of World Astrology Report, whether you've signed up here on YouTube or at worldastrologyreport.com. In the members only section, we discuss the various kinds of cataclysm that people are talking about in the spiritual space, including pole shifts, Carrington events, solar micronovas, and the solar flash. How likely are these things? Well, Stefan is the man to ask, and ask him I did. Sign up on YouTube to get ad-free access to that video right now, or become a member on my website, which is better value because it also gives you access to my monthly long-form live streams, where I go deep into the astrology and all the weird and wonderful topics that we get into on this channel. All the old streams are there for you to watch right now. The next stream is taking place on June the 21st at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. It's called The Hermetic Age, Astrology, Secrecy, and Breakaway Civilizations. Some prominent figures in the alternative research community, including Richard Dolan, Joseph Farrell, and Catherine Fitz, have talked extensively about the existence of a breakaway civilization with access to vast amounts of secret financing, as well as knowledge and technology that the rest of us can only dream of. In the coming stream, we'll explore how astrology might offer confirmation that a secret breakaway civilization with access to advanced technology really does exist. Then we'll consider where the world is heading now and ask a pointed question. Is the breakaway civilization about to break back in? You can purchase entry to this stream directly on the live streams page of my website, but members of worldastrologyreport.com get access to all streams included in their membership package, as well as access to my private forum. You can cancel your membership at any time, so there's that. Thanks for listening. Now let's get into my interview with Stefan. All right, we are live with Stefan Burns. How are you doing, Stefan?
Hey, glad to be here. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great, and I'm really happy that we've finally been able to make this happen because it's something we've been talking about for quite a while, and I'm really glad that you're here. So welcome to World Astrology Report.
Yeah, well, people love the conversations that we've had before. They're like, you guys are the dream team, the dynamic duo. Make it happen. Like every week we want it. So here we are.
All right, well, here we are giving the people what they want.
That's right.
So just to begin, for those in the audience who aren't aware of what you do. You have a YouTube channel, Stefan Burns, and you are absolutely killing it right now. The channel's exploded, and it's really awesome to see that. But perhaps you could just explain to people out there, what is the channel about and what's your vision for it?
Yeah, the channel just started as a kind of a expression of what I find interesting. And I also had some guidance, you could say, from the universe to kind of go my own direction. So, I knew that YouTube could eventually pay the bills in a way that a lot of things can't. So I was like, well, I love to educate people, and I am on my own personal journey of self-exploration. And I wanted to do like a research sabbatical. So it all worked nicely in that way. So I just, with my geology and geophysics background, I did a lot of exploration to like Earth, and like the Schumann resonances really caught my interest. And then it just naturally evolved into looking at the sun, solar activity. And then eventually I got into astrology, and that was really a game changer to also then kind of lock in, you could say, a non-scientific discipline, though, as we both know, is like the oldest science. It just requires a little bit more of, the different part of your brain. And at the same time, I've always been kind of spiritually minded. So going on some explorations there and doing a lot of traveling around the world during this time, and just kind of bringing all that together and just presenting authentically. So the channel has just been growing really rapidly, because now with all these different understandings across a variety of disciplines, it's pretty multifaceted. Of course, there's always more to learn, but because it's multifaceted, it's very holistic, and people like that holistic approach. And they like to know, okay, what's the sun doing, and has there been a solar flare, and what's the background astrology, and how the two work together. And that seems to have made me a lot more accurate as it relates to like the space weather forecasting, and vice versa. I think the solar stuff would be really good for more astrologers to integrate. And I'm seeing more and more people do that. You don't have to become an ultra expert, but it definitely seems to be helpful. It's like, oh, we have this thing in Aries, and the sun is blasting off, and it's in Aries, and it's exalted. Like, there's some resonance there. So that's what I present on the channel. There's also wildfreeorganic.com. That's my business store.
Yeah, I think what is really compelling to people about what you're doing is the way that you're bringing together your science knowledge, your background as a geophysicist, with spirituality and with astrological knowledge, and kind of saying we don't have to keep these two systems of knowledge in separate boxes. We can actually bring them together. And you're also essentially saying, astrology is a valid form of knowledge, and the wisdom we can get from it is valid and important. And let's bring science together with spirit. And my impression is that's what people love about your channel. That's what I love about it. And I wonder what the reaction from people has been to you doing that, among your fans and the people who love your channel, as well as from people who are more scientifically minded and in the, say, academic community.
Well, there's a few responses. The majority one is definitely like, I've been searching for this, like, thank God. And I have to give you props, because I've watched your videos for a long time now. And I mean, you prove the science of astrology basically in every single video. I mean, your most recent one on the financial cycles, it was this, there's a common breadcrumb when there's like a truth or a story. And not everyone is able to like kind of follow it all the way. And if there's a little bit of a dead end, like pick up the scent and follow it. But like, you're a bloodhound, I'm a bloodhound. And that is key to finding that larger narrative that then clearly shows itself, which you do time and time again. It's like, by the end of it, you're like, that just makes so much sense. So, but most people appreciate it, bring everything together. I guess some people that maybe they found me on a more science-focused video, and then they click on one of the more holistic ones or more the spiritually focused ones. Like, what the heck is this? I'm out of here. And so that's fine. And then there's some people that just say, I get more of these than I would like, but some people are dumb. They're like, here's another prediction that's going to come false. And then 2 days later, it's like a forecast, like a space weather forecast. And 2 days later, it's like, I'm pretty much spot on with the forecast, and they're nowhere to be found. And some people jump the gun and it's just everyone has their own. Not everyone watches the full video, things of this nature. But in general, like it seems this age of this Pluto to Aquarius and kind of coming age of Aquarius is really getting people to see things from a greater perspective. And I think 2020 also caused that big shift. And it seems like it's really accelerating now with the Saturn-Neptune cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk a bit more astrology a little later. First of all, what I thought would be really interesting to talk about is solar cycles. Because as you mentioned earlier, understanding solar cycles can be really helpful for people who are into astrology. There's no reason why we can't bring these things together. And from what I understand, there are solar cycles that are linked to world events. And we've seen how when we've had solar maximums, there's a trend towards seeing more revolutions in the world, more sort of dramatic events of that kind. And we're in solar maximum right now, and we're seeing some pretty dramatic events in LA at the moment. And I wonder if I could get your thoughts on that. Like, how do solar cycles affect life on Earth?
Yeah, well, in general, the sun goes through these rhythms and activity, and there's variations across time. So there's different secular variations that they're called. So there's a 22-year hail cycle, and then there's a about 11 year on average solar cycle, which is where you have the magnetic field flip. And sometimes that doesn't occur, like during a grand solar minimum. And there's variations of that 11 year, both in time. Sometimes they're shorter, sometimes they're longer. The shorter ones usually are more intense. The longer ones usually are a bit weaker. But also sometimes the sunspot count is just not that much. Like the last solar cycle maximum, 24, we never broke 150 on sunspots. Whereas at this solar cycle 25, we went to like 215 at our peak, and that was August 2024. But there's like a 3-year maximum period. There's a 3-year descending phase, 3-year minimum, 3-year ascending phase. And so you kind of break it up like that. But there's also longer cycles. There's like a 88 to 100 year long cycle known as a Gleisberg cycle. And so just like a wave that has a peak and a trough. And we suspect that the most recent Gleisberg trough was solar cycle 24, which was 2010 to 2014 for like the maximum period. And so then that was also active like at the very beginning of the 20th century, and then things started to pick up. So World War II was basically right during the peak of that Gleisberg cycle, just a little bit before. Solar cycle 19 was super strong. That was the late 50s, early 60s. So you could say that was the peak of the Gleisberg cycle. There was, of course, crazy stuff happening. Cold War after World War II, they're dropping tons of bombs. The astrology was nuts. But then there's even longer variations. There's like 2,000 year cycles. There looks like there's some sort of like maybe 8,000 year modulation. You have what's known as grand solar maximums, where you have really strong solar cycles for like 200-300 years. Then you also have grand solar minimums, where you have basically 0 sunspots and solar flux stays super flat and there's no variation. That can last like 50, 60, 70 years. And usually the maximums and the minimums will cluster together. So it is interesting because we see pretty much on the dot, a lot of researchers have looked at this. When you have a solar maximum, that's when the revolutions occur, or what some of the researchers have called spontaneous social processes. So there's like, you could say the fire has been built, but it needs that spark. And during solar maximum, you just have more energy output from the sun across a variety of metrics. So there's more plasma flux that's being emitted. There's changes in the light spectrum of the sun. So there's more higher vibrational light that's emitted. This would be like extreme ultraviolet and X-ray light, which is ionizing, which charges the global electric circuit, which we live within, changes the geophysics of the planet subtly and sometimes not so much subtly. But then there's also changes pretty significant from solar minimum to maximum in the radio frequencies, which before 1850, the only real radio frequency signature, like a microwave or a radio wave, was natural and from the sun. And these have pretty profound biologic interactions. That's been shown. You see the Schumann resonances, they are modulated also by the solar cycle in their frequency and intensity. There's a little bit of a shift with them. So if you have a solar maximum, maybe like 12 months later is when the Schumann frequencies go up ever so slightly. And we see that the weaker solar cycle doesn't have as much of an effect on the Schumann frequency as a strong solar cycle does. These are extremely low frequency wavelengths of light that are naturally resonant with the Earth at like 8 hertz, 14 hertz, 20 hertz, 26 hertz, 33, that overlap with our brain waves, both in strength or intensity, power, and also in frequency. So once you start to learn just these various facts and you put them together, it's like, whoa, the sun has a huge, huge, huge influence over everything. And all of us together as a society, we all kind of have our own societal resonance. And then if the overall like activity level, and even I just think like the overall metabolic activity level for people goes up, there's just more energy in the body, more things happening. I think that just gives people that extra edge needed to wake up and be a bit more conscious and, congregate, and these spontaneous social processes can then result in, you get the American Revolution, which was on solar cycle 3, which was extremely strong. One of the strongest we have on record, like 19, solar cycle 3, sunspots went up to like 400 at one point. They were very close to it, which is insane. Our solar cycle 25 has reached a peak of 215. Now it's, right now the monthly count for June, which is not over, but it's only like 100 right now. So there's variations, but the revolutions through Europe, there's just so many examples that you can go through since we began tracking this. And I think it probably goes further back. And if you consider like solar minimum periods where you don't have this variation, these are probably the periods of time where there just isn't much societal change and perhaps even chaos. But we are in what's known as a modern maximum right now. And I don't know when the next grand minimum will be. Some people think it's coming up really soon. Some people think it's you can't really forecast it, maybe centuries away. But I don't expect, based on this data, I don't expect society to calm down anytime soon until the next solar minimum. And so with what's happening in LA right now, with now Saturn and Neptune and Aries, and that Martial element getting activated, and the sun being like crazy, and there's also a lag time. So all that energy pumped in 2024, still very much active right now. And there's of course all the political astrology. I'm not surprised that that is like a tinderbox there that just got set alight. So hopefully that all gets resolved. But
yeah, I thought it might be interesting actually if we just have a look at one of the charts that you sent me. I'm just going to share my screen. Can you see the chart that I brought up here?
Yeah.
Relationship between solar activity and spontaneous social processes. Maybe you could just take us through that a little bit.
Yeah, so on the left, we see our x-axis down below, which is our date. That's years. And we see our DOI link. So if you want to read the paper, you could type that in. But you'll see solar cycle 3 there with the American Revolution. That one being very, very strong. And that was a big, world-changing revolution. Probably more so than most of these on the list. You get the first Russian Revolution there in the early 1900s, and the second one, and you see the big wave of solar activity we had in the 20th century, and that's solar cycle 19, that really big peak. The biggest one of the entire graphic there is solar cycle 19, and it shows solar cycle 24 on this graphic, doesn't show 25. That'd be the most recent one. But the one that shows Arab Spring, that was around solar cycle 24. So I'm sure there's like other things that have occurred during non-maximum periods, but in general, if you like kind of select for the most extreme examples, they cluster on the maximums.
Yeah, I mean, I find this pretty interesting. I mean, if we look at the major revolutions, we do see a lot of the major revolutions of history on here, seemingly coinciding with these solar maximums. And so it makes me think that taking into account these solar cycles, it probably should be something that astrologers are doing, maybe as a kind of layer of understanding. If we think about astrology, in particular world astrology, as constituting a variety of layers, it looks to me like this really should be one of the layers that astrologers are looking at, because we can say, even perhaps right now, right, we're at a solar maximum, and it's much more likely that we're going to see these spontaneous social processes, as you say.
One other thing to give people is, if you go back to that really quick, just to kind of drive that point home, is the combination of astrology and the solar activity is that the strongest solar cycles that we have in that time range, which is solar cycle 3 and 19, is when Pluto was either basically like near or in Aquarius, then also with Pluto in Leo. So working with or against the dignity of the sun. So the one that has the American Revolution on it, Pluto in Aquarius, and then the one that's the tallest one of the bunch, solar cycle 19, that's Pluto in Leo. So it's just like an extra little flavor of understanding of like, okay, like Pluto being the planet of power and kind of an amplifier in that regard. Like we see the strongest solar cycles there. It's also the planet furthest out. So you create kind of like this longer dipole, perhaps, of polarity and energy. I mean, there's no like hard or fast definitive answer with that, but I just find correlations and connections like that super interesting.
Definitely. One thing that makes me wonder about is, have there been studies done that connect the cycles of the planets with the cycles of the sun? Could it be that the gravitational effects of the planets being in different positions could have effects on what the sun is doing?
Yeah, there are a few research papers. One of them, just one understanding in general. And the reason why I do a lot of research into astronomy too, like studying astrology has helped me really with the astronomy, because there's a lot of good astro knowledge in astrology, and they're really not separate. But there's so much good knowledge there that astronomers miss, and so they're kind of they don't learn about all these little asteroids or rocky bodies or senoids or whatever, right? But then the astronomy really helps inform the astrology too. So the gravitational pull of Jupiter and Saturn alters what's known as the barycenter of the solar system, and this is the actual true gravitational center. So the sun actually orbits around that. And there's some connections between, or at least some initial research suggesting that it's the orbit of the sun around the barycenter and the tug of the gas giants, specifically mostly though Jupiter and Saturn, that does alter some of these longer term variations in solar activity. Not the solar cycle, but some of the other longer frequency ones. And then an interesting connection is just the fact that a solar cycle is usually about 12 years long, and then Jupiter's orbit, it's actually even closer. It's pretty precise. Like the solar cycle is like 11 to 12 years, and Jupiter's orbit is like 11.8. So they're almost like a perfect match. And, if Jupiter was a tiny little planet of not really any significance, then maybe it's something, but it's like the second biggest planet, and it's almost like a protostar. So it having this ability to alter seemingly the magnetic dynamo within the sun is really interesting. The sun rotates rather very, very slowly, has almost no rotational velocity, but Jupiter is the fastest. Basically, it's spinning like once every 8 hours or something like that. So there's a tremendous amount of like rotational velocity to it. So it has a special ability to kind of exert torque on the other planets as a result. And yeah, these dynamics are really interesting. No one's really figured it out, but I just see, if I see like some common connections, I'm like, there's probably something to that. I'm not going to immediately discount it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm going to throw you a bit of a curveball question now, which I haven't warned you about, but I want to see what you have to say about this. The question is this: is the sun conscious?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's crazy to think otherwise. Um, though for some reason this is like a crazy thing for some people. I don't get it. But I think there's plenty of evidence that plasma is conscious, and there's, there's I think overwhelming evidence that the Earth is conscious just because we are all living on the Earth. So who am I? If I'm conscious, and I think I'm probably conscious, right? If I'm conscious, then why would the Earth not be conscious? And if the sun has this ability to alter the energy dynamics of literally every other planet in the solar system, and they're actually all connected together all the time. We're seeing really interesting things like we had some really significant space weather recently, the G4 storm from a big solar storm, and I forecasted that we would get some big solar activity. This is beginning of June, end of May of 2025. Mercury did its superior conjunction, that Cazimi on the far side of the sun, and right when it did that, we had this big solar storm blast off. So it seems that these energy chords always exist, and certain alignments of that can trigger changes with the sun, and energy contains information. Energy can't be created nor destroyed. So it's, it's going somewhere. Some is going to go beyond the Earth if it hits, the Earth. Some will go beyond to outer space, but once it's there, it's there. And with quantum physics, like the amplitude or the intensity of the signal doesn't matter. It's just, is there information in the field or is there not information? And so I think the sun is like a beyond super conscious, and on my own personal experience, like talking to the sun, working with the sun. I have so much Leo on my chart, it's stupid. If I go by sidereal, I'm a Leo. So then here I am talking space weather and the sun. It's just crazy. So, but yeah, I think there's so much like reductionist science, and so many people have their part of their brain so closed off that they can't even admit that, other people are conscious other than themselves. I don't know, it's kind of like an epidemic. But yeah, what's the sun want to do with the Earth? That's kind of the big question. Like, what's it want to do to us?
That's a really interesting perspective. One of the ideas that's floating around, as you mentioned, is that plasma itself is conscious. There's this book, A New Science of Heaven by Robert Temple. I keep meaning to read it. I haven't gotten round to it, but he makes the argument about plasma itself potentially being conscious, in which case the sun would be, highly conscious. Have you got into that research?
Yeah, I read his book, and so I keep meaning to read Cosmos and Psyche, and so we swapped on that. But yeah, no, I've been doing a lot of plasma research recently, and it's interesting because there seems to be a Leidenfrost effect. And so for anyone that's not familiar, if you get a pan really hot and drop some water in it, the little water beads will kind of dance around because the heat of the pan will cause part of them to immediately vaporize into steam, which then insulates them. So energy can't be created or destroyed. That's what the best available evidence suggests. And so plasma, there's the cold outer space. You think, all the energy would immediately spread out and dissipate. But there seems to be a Leidenfrost effect with plasma, where it's able to contain itself and not lose its energy. And there may be just a very slight outer boundary. And if you look at the Earth, that kind of makes sense. Like, why hasn't the Earth just gone completely null? Or why hasn't the sun got completely null? All the explanations are that has all this fuel inside of it. But there's increasing evidence that the plasma on the sun may just kind of be an outer coating even. Like, there's some really interesting stuff that it's very exploratory, not definitive at all. But regardless, if plasma can keep itself hot and has this Leidenfrost effect, and it has its own internal coherent structure, and it can form these layers which are radically different from one another in terms of the density of the ions and also the temperature. So you can have these hot and cold layers. And some of the research into the early solar system, like the accretion, shows that a lot more energy is preserved in the core of a planetesimal than not, which would be a round body, 50, 100 kilometers. A surprising amount of energy actually gets sequestered and trapped there. And so if that's the case, you could have you could kind of cold, but not really plasma structures deeper inside like planets or planetesimals. And so it seems, based on my research, that more and more of our understandings of natural science are going to go plasma based. I think that's actually going to be pretty revolutionary for geology. I think all the models that we have now, not all of them, but a lot of the models that we have now are actually going to convert over to a simpler plasma understanding. We have plasma within ourselves. There's bioplasma, and there's all plasma all around us. 99% of the universe is plasma, so it's pretty wild.
Yeah, I mean, what I find super interesting about that idea about plasma and therefore about the sun being conscious is that in astrology, we see the sun as signifying that kind of divine spark of consciousness at the core of all of us. And we tend to assume it's a sort of symbolic description of reality, but perhaps it's a much more literal description of reality. If plasma is indeed conscious and it's the sun is made of that, and we have plasma in the molten cores of the planets, then that would imply that they are literally conscious entities.
Yeah. And I don't think it's any surprise that we see these spontaneous social processes and revolutions and all this stuff happen during solar maximum. And there's just more plasma energy on the Earth. I mean, the higher vibrational wavelengths of light, like extreme ultraviolet X-ray that I mentioned, which are 3 orders of magnitude in general. They go up like orders of magnitude from solar minimum to maximum. They hit the Earth, the uppermost atmosphere, what's known as the ionosphere. So ions, charged particles, and they're generating plasma up there. It's normally about 1% plasma, and the rest are like neutral atoms, so they don't have a charge. But you get a very highly vibrational wavelength of light, these photons. It can then cause the electrons to all of a sudden energize up, and you form this plasma. So you're literally, during solar maximum, the Earth is literally becoming more plasmified, you could say. And now it's able to flow a lot easier, and these electric currents can be stronger, and that influences terrestrial geophysics like tropospheric weather. And then also it seems to have a really strong connection to earthquakes and volcanoes. A lot more research that needs to be done there, but I mean, it's crazy to think that maybe the sun can send off a blast of plasma, which then triggers an earthquake under a certain place, and perhaps it's doing it for a reason. It's not just complete, zero understanding. It's like maybe the sun is like, India needs a wake-up call or something like that, right? I mean, it's not outside the realm of possibility. It's much smarter than us. It's much, much, much smarter than us, I think. So we just have to have faith, right? We have faith, and that all works out. And we just gotta trust.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you on that, Stefan. One question that all this brings to my mind as well, and maybe another curveball I'm going to hit you with, but if plasma is indeed conscious, then what does that imply about nuclear weapons and consciousness? What does it suggest that we've been exploding these extremely powerful weapons that generate plasma, which may well be conscious? And I'm thinking here about how we developed nuclear weapons in the 1940s. And weirdly enough, this is also the time when the UFO phenomenon really makes itself known, seemingly perhaps some kind of interaction with conscious beings from elsewhere. Could all of these kind of things be connected?
Yeah, I mean, there's one kind of joke out there that some reactors, like fusion reactors, haven't worked because the moment they generate like a plasma being and it's conscious, it realizes it's trapped in like this magnetic prison, and so it utilizes a kink instability, and all of a sudden just nopes out of the equation because plasma likes to curl in on itself, and then like it kind of stops the whole experiment. But yeah, if you're generating like more plasma in the atmosphere and these plasmoids, and perhaps they have consciousness, there's evidence going back like centuries of that. of these plasmoids flying through like buildings and even airplanes and stuff. Like some weird reports, very weird reports. And consciousness isn't just tied to 3 dimensions, but it's actually multidimensional. Like, we go 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th dimension. And, we could be just creating stronger conduits to these other dimensions. And then these more higher dimensional beings, perhaps, are now more expressed in our material reality that we're aware of. But some of the interesting things about nukes is that you like explode a nuke, like a nuclear bomb, and it's a tremendous amount of energy. So you immediately, and you also produce a ton of gamma radiation, right? People talk about the gamma rays coming off of even just the waste. So that generates just a immediate ball of plasma as well with the explosion locally, which then has a ton of effects in that local area in terms of the atmosphere and the weather. And even if it's detonated on the ground, it can, some of these earthquakes that have been registered from a nuclear blast can be like magnitude 6 or so. I mean, huge earthquakes, it can be. And the geophysical signatures of a nuclear blast are almost identical to those from an earthquake, suggesting that there may be some sort of nuclear origin to earthquakes. And that's why their signatures are so similar when we look at like what's known as a traveling ionospheric disturbance or some of these other things. But the crazy thing about nukes, I just learned this, is that you have not only the X-ray light and the gamma ray light, but you also produce a tremendous amount of neutrons in a particle cascade, basically. But a lot of these neutrons are neutral, so they escape, they don't follow the magnetic field, they fly out, but they decay into a variety of lesser particles, you'd call them. And one of those is an electron. And so they can shoot out 20,000 or 10, 20, 50,000 kilometers, which is, massive distance. Earth's radius is like 6,400 or 6,700, something like that. I think it's like 6,400 kilometers. So they can go way, way, way out, generate now really quickly because the half-life is like not even a second. These electrons, which then follow the magnetic field because they're no longer neutral, they would then rain down into the planet. And so a lot of research back in the 50s and 60s, 70s, they noticed these widespread global energetic effects from nukes. And these effects could even be on the shadow side of the Earth. So if the nuke was on the day side, you could call it, right? Just that's where the nuke was. The shadow side would be like 180 opposite. And you even notice like aurora and things of that nature, ionospheric disturbances there. And that particle cascade model explains that. You have these neutrons, they zip out, they decay into electrons as well as other things, but the electrons follow the magnetic field and boom, there you go. So I don't think it's a surprise that we see the 2 strongest earthquakes in, as far as I know, recorded history in 1960 with Chile, 9.5, and then 1964, Alaska, 9.2. That's right when all this testing was occurring with the Tsar Bomba and Starfish Prime, like the biggest blast we're all in 1962. And we also see interesting astrology connection is the Uranus-Pluto conjunction, 1965, and the whole psychedelic revolution and all this. So it's like all these things were kind of coming together and combining. And yeah, Pluto seems to be implicated in a lot of it. Through its Pluto-Neptune cycle, which you've touched on a tremendous amount, but then also that Pluto-Uranus cycle. And I don't think we really fully understand it, but I think the long-term geophysical effects of the nuclear blasts are still, they're 100% still being felt and being integrated, you could say. And they're still even coming into awareness. Like most people are completely clueless that we dropped thousands of bombs and that they have these sort of geophysical effects. You don't just detonate a nuclear bomb and nothing happens. Like it's a massive, massive explosion and we drop thousands of them. And so that's like a unstoppable train basically that probably could explain a lot of the climate effects that have also been occurring. Massive releases of energy, then all of a sudden the Earth warms up. Makes sense, right? Energy is not just like, thermally radiating out to cover it. There's a radiation imbalance. So think a lot of the climate effects also could be partly attributed, at least, to these nuclear blasts. But that's kind of like an X factor of the solar cycles. They seem to influence human consciousness. And then all of a sudden we add on like this nuclear thing. I think we probably are now in an unstoppable process of maybe, an ascension of consciousness, just a higher understanding. That's what it seems. A lot of people are fully on board with that. So,
yeah, those people aren't on board with much. But I was watching one of your recent videos on this subject, and you were also talking about how nuclear testing supposedly hasn't been done for a long time. I don't know exactly when the last official nuclear tests happened, but it does seem hard to believe that the major powers really just wouldn't test their nukes anymore. I mean, these are such an important part of their arsenals. It kind of beggars belief that they would just not test them, not test any new ones they've built and designed and so forth. And you were talking about this in your video, and you were speculating about perhaps how they may be using certain geophysical phenomena to disguise or hide nuclear testing. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah. So I think the last nuclear test officially from the United States was 1992. And I think it was right around the time like the NES came out. I remember correct. I mean, it's right in that time zone. So here we have a cartridge that you're blowing on to get the dust out, right? To play your Mario game. And we're just going to, and it's similar stuff. I'm sure it's a little bit more advanced, but it's similar stuff. And we're just going to let that sit for like 30 plus years now and never like see if it's good or any of that stuff. I mean, they do supposedly do computer simulation testing of these things. So they create these elaborate models and computers with all the electronics and everything. But it's like, come on, folks, like models are not reality. So it just strikes me as odd that we wouldn't have, it just doesn't make sense to me that we wouldn't have done any sort of future testing. I think that maybe we got a little carried away and with just making them bigger and bigger and bigger. And then the government realized, hey, we should probably like go covert with this and test out more moderate nukes, but we need to keep the technology and the wiring and all that stuff up to date in advance as well. And so they could do more like a tactical explosion. And so these nuclear bombs, they create aurora, and depending on where they're exploded, but there's like on land, they'll generate aurora immediately overhead, like the northern lights or southern lights, just like you see during a geomagnetic storm. They create ionospheric disturbances, they're known as traveling ionospheric disturbances, which you also get during a geomagnetic storm and or sometimes before, during, after earthquakes. So they generate these geophysical perturbations, which, like, if you wanted to hide it, you would wait for there to be some sort of solar storm impact, and that would give you the best chance of masking the signal in terms of those geophysics. And then you want to go somewhere where you don't really have an active seismic network, an active hydrophone network, and things of that nature. And I think it was you, when we were messaging me, you said that there were maybe some testing of like not exactly radioactive stuff, but like around the edge. Like, I'm not 100% expert on this, but it just doesn't make sense to me that we wouldn't do anything. I think maybe the main governments except North Korea just got clever, because we have had North Korea do like 6 tests or something since the 90s. Last one was 2017, I believe. But, they're starting up their new program. I think everyone else, I think US and Russia definitely have just done it discreetly and somehow hit it pretty well and learn how to avoid the main signals that get picked up by this international group that's trying to detect them. And yeah, I don't know. I really don't know, but it's interesting.
I think you're definitely right about that. Let's just change tack a little bit, because you were talking about aurora, and I wanted to talk a little bit about electromagnetic fields, how they affect human beings, essentially. We often hear about people saying during geomagnetic storms, people will report feeling tired or nauseous or having weird dreams and things like that. Could you speak a little bit to that and what you know about the interaction between electromagnetic fields and human beings?
Yeah. Well, anecdotally, and I've had some people reach out to me, there definitely seems to be a very strong connection between enhanced dreaming during a geomagnetic storm, especially if you're grounded. Because if you're grounded, you're connected electrically to the earth. That already enhances your dream state. And you'll notice pretty quickly if you're grounding at night while you're sleeping, you'll have an enhancement of your dreams. That's a pretty well-reported effect. And then, I mean, I do a lot of personal experimentation with this myself. There definitely seems to be an effect during geomagnetic storms. And there's also an effect with like significant planetary alignments and also full moons, like the lunar cycle. So all those seem to affect the dream state. Then also, when you have these magnetic field fluctuations, I mean, that's interacting at the DNA level, the molecular level, the cellular level, and it seems to, in general, just kind of have a metabolic effect, metabolism being the net aggregate of all reactions occurring in the body. And I think it's very individual. So if someone's in a good state of health, and also if you consider the astrology, someone maybe has a natural resonance with maybe solar energies because they have Leo signatures or things of that nature, maybe Aries. I think they're going to be better able to work with those energies coming in from the sun. That's my own personal experience. I usually get fired up. Very rarely do I have negative symptoms from a solar storm impact. And then some people just aren't going to be as resonant with that. And or if their health is in a certain spot, let's say they have a lot of free radical activity in the body, a lot of inflammation, they already have chronic pain, disease, and things really heavily implicated with the microbiome too, then it'll take on maybe the more negative expression. And it's probably really mostly driven by the microbiome, actually, because we see a really strong connection between bacteria and magnetic fields and also electromagnetic radiation across a lot of the spectrum, especially the non-ionizing spectrum, which would be microwaves, radio frequency, Schumann resonances, and even lower stuff, geomagnetic pulsations. But geomagnetic pulsations, which are less than 5 hertz, so that's 5 cycles per second, that's really strongly linked to heart rhythms. It alters, there's different power bands. If you look at heart rate variability, which is the time gap between heartbeats, so you have a heartbeat 1 second at 1.2, 0.9, there's a variability. You can split that into different power components. So using like a Fourier transform, so you get like a very low power, then you get, very low power, then like high power. And it's like these different bands. And that seems to shift those, and they're connected to like your autonomic nervous system, whether you're stressed or relaxed. And so if you have already like cardiac conditions or heart problems, or you're elderly, it seems to increase like the chance for a heart attack or an infarction or AFib, any of these things. So there's like a lot of these connections. It's really interesting, but in general, that's why if you overthink it, I think it can get too much. That's why I just really recommend like just make sure you're grounding as often as you can, because that balances your bioelectricity and it should make everything like work out fine. At least, as God wills it. And then you can start to work with the solar energies a little bit more conducively and maybe funnel that towards like a passion project or, something that really lights you up. I think that's the key. It's also about how you apply, because if the sun is consciousness, then how are we applying our consciousness to the energy that's coming in? Are we just doing it from like a lower frequency, lower consciousness victim perspective? Or are we turning the tables? Because consciousness can shift unlike anything else. Everything else has inertia to it. The earth or the body. If you're fat, it's going to take a long time to lose 50 or 100 pounds or more. And then emotions have like their rhythms, and it can take time to like get over the loss of a loved one or a breakup or something like this, because the hormones they need to like equalize. And then your mind, you can get these mental loops, but in general, you can kind of trim those up and get that cleaned up a little bit faster than your emotions. But then when you go to spirit, the shift can be instant. There doesn't have to be any time at all. You can have an instant consciousness shift if you want to, if you reach that level of enlightenment. And so I think that's really what solar consciousness is offering us. By bringing that in, it can immediately shift you into a higher state. And so let's say you had this solar storm come in and you are happening to resonate with it in a negative way and you're feeling all these things in your body. It's really just illuminating, in my mind, in my perspective, it's really just illuminating everything that needs to get fixed. And if you take that truth of that, very Plutonian, which is why I think the sun and Pluto resonate together. But if you take the truth of that, then you can make that instant shift. And from that point on, you'll stop eating, the sleeve of cookies every night. Make sure you actually get 8 hours of sleep, and you'll start drinking spring water and not, toxic tap water. And whatever, or you break off that relationship that isn't serving you. There's a billion things, right? But I think that is really the opportunity with solar consciousness. And it's kind of the way pain works in general is it'll keep giving that signal until you finally integrate and realize the lesson that it's giving you and make the change. And that change you can make, at least a solar consciousness, that spirit dimension, it's instant. And then the mental, the emotional, and the physical changes can follow afterwards. They'll take time, but they can follow after you make that mindset shift.
I think something else that strikes me about this theme of electromagnetism and its effects on the body is that we are absolutely swimming in artificial electromagnetic fields these days, right? With all the 4G, 5G, Wi-Fi, it's all around us. What are your thoughts on that? How does that stuff affect us, if it does affect us? And what can we do to lessen the effects, if there are negative effects from that?
Yeah, I do my best to hold like a non-dual perspective. And so based on the research, there's a tremendous amount of health effects from these radio frequencies, especially like the microwave. And once you get to the gigahertz range, because it interacts with water will absorb a lot of different light frequencies, even down to like Schumann resonances. There's been studies showing the connection with water being able to capture onto these photons, re-emit them later, and the information is preserved. But as you go up to megahertz, it starts to capture the light energy a little bit more. And then as you go into gigahertz, all of a sudden it really rapidly will capture all the info. So that's why a microwave works. Your microwave is spitting out basically light radiation in gigahertz frequencies, causing water molecules to vibrate, and so it heats up the food. But it's not just causing water molecules to vibrate and rotate. There's a whole bunch of other effects too. That's just one way the energy is captured. So it heats up your food, but it's also imprinting your food with energy and all this stuff, whatever. So 4G, 5G, 5G is significantly worse than 4G. I have 4G on my phone. I also have 5G, but I have 5G turned off in the settings, right? I don't really sweat too much about 4G. I definitely don't have 5G on. There's a big difference going from sub gigahertz to gigahertz. That's really the key with the electric susceptibility. But I think that explains a lot of the chronic fatigue that people have, and also people's weakened immune systems and brain fog, I think, and pain, just generalized pain and inflammation. I think all that can be really connected to 5G, which is the same frequency that your router runs on in most of your smart devices if you have them. So you want to turn the Wi-Fi off at night. And the best way to work with this energy is to go outside and ground. Because A, if you're out in nature, you're farther away from stuff. And B, you also discharge any built up energy and you bring yourself into coherence. So it's actually an interesting thing. I did some thought experiments on this, but I haven't shared it anywhere. But we build up this excess kind of chaotic charge in our body. And when you ground, you're literally differentiating that cohesive but chaotic and undifferentiated energy, which has a whole bunch of different frequencies within it. You're literally differentiating it and then splitting it apart and then shooting some of it down to the earth, and the rest of it you're keeping. So you're bringing yourself into coherence. And in general, you're creating more energetic coherence across you and your entire environment. And the earth can work with that energy and bring it into coherence as well. So by grounding, you're just improving the coherence of everything around you, and you're just bringing more order to the chaos, which would have a bunch of beneficial health effects. But I also see that it's not necessarily, like, from the maybe greater perspective, a bad thing, because if we look back just 200 years where the only energy in this part of the light spectrum was from the sun, the earth now has a lot more energy in these pretty highly vibrational wavelengths. And so if we think of the earth as being conscious, there's a lot of crazy stuff in 5G and 4G, all the videos people are watching, whatever. But we're the children of the earth. And I think she's probably actually pretty happy that we've turned it all on. There may be some negatives to it, whatever, but we're just making the earth a more vibrational place. And so long as we keep it coherent and orderly, that seems to be an important factor as it relates to having greater consciousness. More complex organisms generally have greater consciousness because they're, at least with like general resonance theory, you need these more complex ordered structures of vibration that are nested within each other. If it's just like a simpler structure, it's a simpler consciousness. So this push by humans of, making technology, and I'm thinking of like technifying everything, not sure that's a word, but technifying everything is basically, I think, creating this pulse of human consciousness. And it perfectly lines up with the Pluto-Neptune conjunctions in Gemini, and also the perihelion shift of Sedna into Gemini. So I think those two factors, and then we have, we're going to pour gasoline on it, starting with Uranus, like really soon with Uranus going into Gemini. We just had to warm up with Jupiter. Like, it's about to get nuts. So I think I don't look at it purely from a negative standpoint. I think so long as you're doing what you can to be healthy, you shouldn't sweat it too much. But I'm also reading The Holy Science by Sri Yukteswar. He's talking about just being in nature is what will bring everything into balance. And, he's like, it's just very clear that if you are in cities and towns, it's just very active, you just get shifted away from nature, which is the perfect representation of God. So I just think we have to be mindful of this stuff and not get lost in our phones and just lost in it and, lose consciousness. I mean, there's forces out there that want us to be slaves. And so it's our job and our responsibility to keep the light and consciousness up and elevated and rising, and to lift other people up as well.
Yeah, one of my perspectives on this subject, on the subject of technology and the power it exerts over us, is I kind of see it as an oppositional force which can actually strengthen us. We have to develop more will, more control over ourselves in order to avoid getting completely sucked into these devices that we carry with us everywhere. One of the things I've done recently is I've switched my iPhone to black and white mode. So it's only black and white, because one thing you don't notice is just how vibrant the colors are on smartphones. They're extremely bright and lurid. And they're actually, a lot of the time, like the most vibrant thing that you look at. And for me, I felt like there was something wrong, that the phone was the most vibrant thing that my eyes ever look at, and not the actual world. And I actually noticed when I did this and switched the phone to black and white, that the world itself looked brighter almost immediately. And I've kind of gotten used to it now, so that effect has worn off a little bit. But I think it's important to think about how we can use our interaction with technology to grow, because it is very powerful and it can suck us in. And here I'm thinking a little bit of some of the things that Rudolf Steiner said, the Austrian mystic. More than 100 years ago, he was speaking voluminously about our times, and he was talking about what he called the Ahrimanic forces and how sort of rationalism and technology would come to try and dominate society, and how we become almost subsumed by these sort of impersonal forces. He talked about what he called the incarnation of Ahriman, this kind of materialist being which wants us to convince that there is no realm of spirit. He talked about this subject as if this was something that was very literally going to happen, that Ahriman was going to incarnate in the world. But even if you don't choose to take Steiner literally, you can kind of see what he was talking about playing out. And he was very specific that all of this would be done with the use of electrical technology. And that's exactly what we've seen. It's completely taken over the world. And he also said that the incarnation of Ahriman isn't something that can be prevented, and nor should we try to prevent it. It's something that we have to deal with. We have to meet it consciously. We have to see it for what it is. So long as we stay conscious, as long as we stay wise to the traps that this technology has for us, it's not necessarily a bad thing. This is just a phase of development that we have to go through and meet consciously and grow through.
Yeah, and they're going to invoke, try to at least all our primal patterns and senses and everything. I mean, if you have two eyes and you pay half attention to things, I mean, you'll see some weird stuff. Like when I first started Twitter, I never used Twitter. And I started because people were saying, it'd be good to do it for the YouTube channel and have intermediate updates. I've like never used Twitter. I loaded up, and I think we actually chatted about this. And like all of a sudden, my feed just had a whole bunch of like wacko stuff and like soft core stuff that's like trying to lead you into that primal male drive. It was like, what is this? Like, this is not at all like I signed up for Twitter to basically learn about science and to maybe check out some financial content. But it would just like really strongly push that. And I had to do a whole bunch of like, don't recommend channel, not interested, to like switch the algorithm. But a lot of people certainly fall into that dopamine trap. And that's just like one way you could trap someone with these Ahrimanic forces, as you're talking about. There's also so many material things. So yeah, it's interesting. I also find it very interesting that Uranus and Neptune 1993 was in Capricorn, which is perfectly resonant with that. It's Capricorn, domicile of Saturn. Some people think Saturn is the devil. It's the devil card in the tarot. And why was the internet basically birthed in like the Earth sign? But I think it has, and not like Gemini or something, right? I think it's bringing all these things to light, and that's a 171-year long cycle. So it's not like that's over in like 2 decades. Like that's going to play out all the way till what, 2160 or something like that. I think so. I mean, that's really long time frames on this. Maybe not 2160, but in the 22nd century. So it's like a very long thing. So, yeah, Steiner seems to have been really spot on with something. He seems to have been very early and aware of what was happening, what was coming, and a lot of wisdom there across a multitude of domains.
Yeah, absolutely. If you read Steiner's lecture collections on the incarnation of Ahriman and Lucifer, the digital doppelganger, and you read what he was saying, these are lectures that he gave in maybe 1917, 1918, the early 20th century. There are parts where it really just sounds like he's just describing our world, almost like scarily accurately. I think you don't have to take Steiner's word for everything. I had Gordon White, the magician, an author, on this channel a while back, and he was saying that if we should consider Steiner, say if we consider him as a kind of remote viewer, and he'll have a percentage level of accuracy, like remote viewing teams tend to have. You can say we're 80% accurate. If you apply that to Steiner, then I think it's a healthy perspective to look at his work. You don't have to read all his work and take all of it as gospel necessarily, although of course some people do.
Some people always do.
Yeah, some people always do. You know, they do it to everybody. People like to join cults, but if you take it like that, you can see that he was not really accurate about a lot of stuff, and it's worth reading some of those lecture collections I mentioned. I think it's pretty important. It's also a really interesting point you bring up, though, the Uranus-Neptune conjunctions of 1993, which definitely heralded the birth of the web. And it is an interesting question as to why did that happen in Capricorn? And a few years ago, I was thinking about this, and I was sort of struggling to understand that. I think I had a different perspective on the web and the effect of the internet at that time, because I was thinking, well, isn't this just a kind of a network that allows us to share information? Isn't it a kind of tool of liberation and something that educates us? And, yes, it does do those things, but it's starting to become quite clear that it's also being used by the establishment, Capricorn. It's being used to control people. Saturn, it's not difficult at all for me to see now why that conjunction came in the sign of Capricorn, because I think the Capricornian nature of the web and its use by the Capricornian elements of society is starting to become extremely obvious right now. And you can see more pieces being put in place at the moment to create, and this is something I've talked about a lot on my channel, it's quite obvious that there's some kind of totalizing control system being put in place. We have the specter of digital IDs, digital money. We have tracking devices that we carry everywhere with us. You don't have to be paranoid or particularly clever to see how these pieces fit together and what they result in. They do result in potentially a complete surveillance and control system, one where you can't even spend money on things if you are not on the right list. If you've kind of talked about, you could imagine quite easily that there might come a time in a not too distant future where if we have this conversation that we're having now, we get our social credit scores go down, and subtly we notice that we don't have access to things that we used to have access to, because these systems aren't going to be transparent. They're not going to give us a real clear insight into what's going on. That's not how bureaucracy works, right? It makes decisions. It says this is the decision. You can't enter your city's leisure zone today, and they won't tell you why. And it's probably because you went on the internet and complained about the control grid. You could see that kind of scenario coming up. So the Capricornian nature of the web is pretty easy to see, but it has also provided us with a lot of wisdom as well. We have to bear that in mind. I wouldn't know the majority of the stuff I know about astrology probably without the internet, and so I think while we acknowledge the challenges that these things pose, it's really important to kind of take a balanced perspective and to see the bigger picture.
Well, it's interesting that we're entering into the age of Aquarius. Following that's going to be the age of Capricorn. So that's like 3,600 years or so due to whether it's precessional cycle or some other force that causes precession, whatever. So basically we're entering into extended age of Saturn, and we have Pluto now in Saturn's sign. We had the great mutation at the cusp of Capricorn and Aquarius. So right there, smack dab in the middle of his domain. And then we have that great conjunction between Uranus and Neptune in Capricorn, and a variety of other things too. The
Saturn and Pluto.
Exactly, with also Ceres, Mercury. So it's a lot of Capricorn stuff, and my kind of philosophy on it, because I have like some prominent placements in that zone. So my perspective on it is like, it's basically saying like shape up or like ship off. I think that's what it is. Like we have to like rise to the occasion, us individually, and also as our own communities, to be that, you could say, mountain goat climbing the mountain and getting to the top before these systems maybe get implemented. And it's that strengthening process. Like I think there's a real demand, like a real metaphysical / spiritual demand for us to do everything in our power to work towards a better future, towards spiritual enlightenment and more. And there's a big test. And if we don't pass the test, it's only our own fault that we didn't pass it. And, the zodiac will turn and we'll get another shot at things, maybe, I don't know, 15,000 years from now or something. Or maybe we fail and then the sun or Sedna decides to launch a huge, asteroid towards us. And it's like, let's just wipe the slate clean. I mean, we don't know. But I think that we all need to be like on our A game. And especially everyone born around 93, I think that's literally like their life imprint, because they have that within them. That's their strongest natal placement, probably. Or at least if it's not their strongest, it's a very, very strong one. And I met quite a lot of 93 people or in that zone, because, I'm around that zone too. And a lot of people are working on the expression of, like, let's say their sun or their moon or their Venus or this, that, whatever. They have some other trine or something. I don't see too many people yet working with that Neptune, Uranus, Saturn signature, because Saturn is also there. As you know, 89 had that conjunction in Capricorn too. So I think as that generation gets older, it's basically like starting now after the first Saturn return. I think that's really going to be like, hey, we need to like get serious. And do what we can to make this world a better place, because the powers that be and the powers that are also materializing that don't want humanity to be liberated, they are do everything they can to sequester. You get a job, we're going to lay you off, so you get a worse job, but we're going to inflate the money supply. So then you're really going to be out of luck, and you're going to be completely trapped. And then we'll implement this, digital currency system, and game over. Like, it's just game over. So we don't want that. We need to totally break the mold and construct a completely new societal system that works for everybody.
I think understanding a bit about what Aquarius is all about is quite important here. Aquarius is a sign that we tend to associate with kind of futuristic or new societal structures and systems and so forth. But there's a bit of a danger in misunderstanding Aquarius, I think, because Aquarius is kind of about the interaction between the individual and the group. It's the individual within the group. It's kind of a sign that we associate with both with individuality and with groups and collectives. And so I think something to really understand is that the quote unquote revolution is going to come when we each individually work on ourselves and awaken and become more conscious. It's going to come from the bottom up, in other words. And that's the key thing to remember. It's not going to come from the top down. Even though we are seeing a kind of dark Aquarian system being applied from the top down, that's not what the age of Aquarius is all about. That's not where we need it to go. We need everybody to be awakening from within and to be working on themselves and to be trying to become more conscious. And that's where the better world that we all hope we'll see is going to come from. And putting your putting your faith in politicians at the moment, kind of technologists, whoever it is not smart. It's not going to lead to the better place that we want to go. At least that's what I believe.
I believe the same thing. I think maybe this year or next year, we're actually going to see a wave of personal declarations of independence. Whereas in 1776, people came together with the last Pluto and Aquarius too, to sign something together, and they therefore had a little bit of a support network. And if we burn together. But now there's a little bit of a freedom with travel, you could say, and the internet, and be able to make a living kind of anywhere, that I think we're going to see a lot of people making personal declarations of independence, and just saying, here are all the things, like writing up their own of what they believe in and what they're going to do, and then that's their truth, and they're going to live by that. And some of those personal declarations of independences may not jive with the law and order of established governments. And then, I don't know, sometimes people think, well, you can't go above the law or something like that. It's like, well, God is definitely above the law. Like the holy law is well above like any sort of government law. And so if people also have this spiritual awakening, and they realize some of these spiritual truths, and they live in resonance with that, that inevitably is going to create some sort of conflict, because there's a lot of power structures being put in place purposely to limit that realization of spiritual law and truth, like just God. So yeah, that's gonna be a big dynamic. It already is, but it's going to continue to be a big dynamic. But with this whole 0 degrees Aries thing that's happening for the next 12 months or so, I mean, that being this big new initiation cycle, Neptune being faith, Saturn being like manifesting it and actually taking action, I think that's a really big component of that. And how that then continues on is going to be really interesting. I think a lot of people are going to vote, you could say, with their currency as that relates, because as we talked about before, last time we had a Saturn Neptune in the very early stage of Aries, it coincided with the birth of coinage. So now we have all these decentralized currencies floating around. Some people are thinking about precious metals again, silver, gold. There's even like some other things too. They have like gold backs. There's like gold plated money. There's all these things. I think people will be able to find their own personal sovereignty, maybe using these alternative global currency systems, and they'll be able to use that to live out their personal declaration of independence. And then if there's enough people that do that, the governments can't, it's too much. They just won't be able to control it or stop it. And so it's like if all the cows in the kennel, or whatever you want to call it, in the barn, decided to rush the fence and the walls, they'll definitely break it down, but they have to do it together. One cow can't do it.
Yeah, I love that phrase that you just said, the personal declaration of independence. I'm going to have to quote you on that. Yeah, I think that's really good. It's a bit similar to something I've been thinking myself in terms of the transit of Neptune through Aries. As a lot of people know, that the last time Neptune moved into Aries, it was 1861, and it coincided almost perfectly with the US Civil War. And there was a theme of union versus secession, independence, that was obviously came through the Civil War there. And you can really see the polarity between the sign of Aries and its opposing sign, Libra. So Aries, kind of independence, sovereignty; Libra, union. And you had states seceding from the union, and in the end, the union won, of course. And it makes me think that in today's context, this could well play out in a similar way in some respects. We do see tension between the states in the US and the federal government. We're seeing it right now with what's going on in California. So it might play out in that way, but astrology is fractal as well. So there are always expressions at other levels of these kind of things. And it's given the nature of society and the nature of this technology, it has made me think if one of the great themes of these times is going to be the sovereignty of the individual versus the collective, the union, the technological systems which are kind of forcing us to play this part in these greater structures, which are quite controlling. Libra is the sign in which Saturn is exalted. So, collectives and society and unions, and they can be quite forceful or restrictive. Society and societal roles can be very restrictive. It's not always. I don't think we can put a kind of sort of moral valence on these signs, like Aries, independence, good, Libra, union, bad, or the other way around. It's kind of what we need is a balance. Ultimately, we need to balance between personal sovereignty and our duties and responsibility to collectives. So I think that's going to be a big theme of the coming years. We'll see it at the level of maybe the whole planet. We're in a globalized world now, and we'll see it maybe on the level of individual states, individual countries, like we're seeing in the US, and then we'll see it at the level of the individual as well.
It's interesting when you mentioned about the Civil War and how we had the Union and then Neptune opposite Libra, which represent the Union. But at the same time, the losers, which you kind of identify with Aries, they had their own union that they want to maintain with slavery. And that got fractured up. It was a union that was more individualistic, you could say, saying everyone has the right to be their own free person. So, yeah, it's interesting how the polarities, it's always yin and yang. This stuff always is mixed up together. And so it seems that in that instance that, the higher spiritual law won out. Because I think spiritual law is very much in agreement that people should not be slaves. But there are certainly going to be themes in, let's say, the loser that there's some truth to, right? Like with the secessionists in the Independent Confederation, there's something about self-sovereignty at that level, but that's not what the expression needed to be. So there's going to be some truth in the movement that ultimately loses, but we're going to have to look to see where the highest spiritual order of law is to maybe get a clue as to which direction we're going.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's complex and it's hard to see exactly how this is going to play out, of course. I'd like to come back to something you mentioned a little bit earlier, which is the planetoid Sedna. As you mentioned, it's got a 10,800 year cycle, and it has a really eccentric orbit, right? So it's kind of at the part of the orbit that it's in now, it's quite close to the sun, and it's passing through signs quite quickly. So I think it was entered Taurus in about 1965 or something like that. Yeah. And it's entered Gemini in about 2023, I think, if I'm not mistaken. I haven't really done much work with Sedna. I don't know too much about it. I wonder if you have some thoughts about what it means, what it's doing astrologically.
Yeah, a few things. Because I think Sedna is more important than probably, most people aren't even aware of Sedna. Its diameter is like 1,000, 1,200 kilometers. It goes out to like nearly 1,000 astronomical units at its furthest. So it's aphelion. And so Earth is at 1 AU, Neptune's at 30. It goes out super deep, way past the normal limit of the solar system into deep, deep space, outside the heliosphere, which the sun creates, which is the magnetized plasma basically of the sun. But then it swings in for its perihelion at around like 70 something AU, around there. So it still doesn't get close to like Pluto, but it's much closer than it was. And so the last appearance of Sedna at perihelion was when we had the pre-pottery Neolithic basically explode out of nothing. And we found evidence of humans in cave art and sorts of things going way back, but Göbekli Tepe, for example, in Turkey, and some of these other tepes, there's a whole bunch of them. There seems to have been a profound shift that occurred in human society and consciousness around 11,600 years ago, which is the last perihelion of Sedna. And so there seems to be a dramatic, like, civilization consciousness shift that it brings about if we use that data point. Ideally, we have like 3 or 4 of these data points, but it's such a long cycle. But the other thing I've been thinking about recently with Sedna is I've been doing research into planetesimal impacts with the Earth, because one of the leading ideas for the creation of the moon is that there was a protoplanet called Theia that was smaller than Earth, about Mars size, but that it hit the Earth, and Earth wasn't as big as it was then, and it created a moon, and that would have actually liquefied the entire mantle into a magma ocean. So it would have been a complete reorganization event for the Earth. But you had all these what are called planetesimals at the very beginning stages of the solar system. And these can be a kilometer across, they can be 50 kilometers or 100 kilometers. And we find evidence of some really big impact craters across the globe. Also, our record of impact craters is really like super spotty at best. So for all the craters that we found, there's probably like 10 times or maybe even like another multiple of that we just have no evidence of, or that we have not found yet. So you have to keep that in mind too. So there's been a ton of these planetesimal impacts, and they're actually what helped create the Earth in the beginning. And they would hit the Earth, and the model simulations show that the mixing is incredibly effective, and that these big, the core of a planetesimal could be 50 kilometers across. If the planetesimal is like 1,000, that 50 kilometer across core can fracture up, mix, and even get down to like decimeter size pretty quickly, decimeter to centimeter size, like really fast. So it's like, size of your finger. It can all mix in there. That surface area now is much, much, much larger. It can undergo these chemical changes. And some of the evidence for this is the fact that we have so much iron in the mantle, because just simple gravity experiments show, like modeling shows that iron settles out really quick because it binds to different things and gravity pulls it down. But we have we're like the mantle is enriched with iron to a much greater degree than it should be with a simple model. So the impact of these planetesimals, A, explains that. B, it also explains how plate tectonics got started, because if you have some massive impactor coming into the planet, it's going to drive this convection cycle, the mixing, everything's going to get started. And it's suspected that plate tectonics as we know it now didn't really get going until like 1 billion years ago. And that there was like a 2 billion year, like at least 2 billion year long period where it was like start and stop plate tectonics. And so it seems to have been, these planetesimals, they seem to have been very important for the evolution of the Earth, going from the Archean and its initial formation and now. And that's all from the accretionary disk. And so some of these planetesimals got flung out because we have evidence of long period objects coming in from the Oort cloud that have that primordial spectral signature. You can analyze the light coming off of it, and you can get an analysis of what the elemental composition is. And so we know that these planetesimals still exist, some of them still primordial. And during the accretion, there was what we suspect called a great migration, where the gas giants moved out. They were closer in, and then they moved out. It says Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, maybe Planet X, maybe there's multiple. There's probably a whole bunch of things that we haven't found yet. Because we just found Sedna like in 2005, and we've been finding more of these TNOs, especially the long period TNOs in the past 2 decades. It's a very new thing. But if things get flung out, you have to think about gravity. It's almost like a concave bowl like this. It's the strongest in the center where the sun is. And the planets on this scale, 1000 AU, are also right there. Anything that gets flung out is going to probably, especially if it's not that large, is probably going to start to come back in at some point. Because it is a force. That gravitational force is always tugging on it. And the nearest star, 4 light years away or so, is much, much more distant than 1000 AU. We can start talking about parsecs if you want. Like, it's still much distant. So it's not like all of a sudden that star is going to pull on it in a much stronger way than our star. You also have the gravitational tide of interstellar space, but you have to get pretty far out for that to become a dominant force too. So the point is that the gravitational force of the sun is going to be very, very important. So these things get flung out, then there's probably a natural cycle where some of them fling it back in, and that could explain this super elliptical orbit of Sedna, where it's going super far out, then sweeping in. One of the traditional explanations is that that's connected to planet X reorganizing the orbit. Some of us think maybe it's due to a ultra-wide binary star. But regardless, in that part of deep space, though, yes, you have this gravitational field of the sun, but it's also going to be very weak. Now, over thousands or millions of years, it's going to be significant enough to slow maybe a planetesimal down. But if there's something big there, it's going to be the big gravitational player. So Sedna having this orbit now coming in from 1000 AU basically, and now getting close to the solar system, Neptune being at 30, it probably has dragged on a bunch of stuff gravitationally and is now bringing things with it. And so I find that very interesting. And we see some of these other objects already in the solar system in certain resonances, like Chiron. Chiron is like 220 kilometers across. It's like the third largest centaur. It shows cometary behavior, so it can form like a coma, which is some indication that it has maybe a plasma core. We talked about the Leidenfrost effect with plasma. And so if that plasma is able to basically remain thermally insulated, it could be like a cold plasma setup, like deeper inside. So how is it that centaur Chiron, which is in deep space, all of a sudden sometimes can just dramatically brighten when it gets close to the sun in its orbit? So these TNOs or sednoids, they could be bringing things with them, and perhaps that could create more of like a cosmic stimulus, because now perhaps you have things that are like on trajectories with Earth, and maybe they're going to impact the Earth. There's this really interesting dynamic that I'm just beginning to explore with Sedna and other long period TNOs, and how they could bring about this really big impulse of, you can say, evolution for the planet, because the Earth does have certain processes that contribute to cooling. It's not perfectly insulated. And so from the Earth's perspective, every now and then it's going to want to get hit by one of these things to wake it up, give it some heat, because the majority of that heat, because of the efficient mixing of the planetesimal, the majority of the heat actually does get trapped within the Earth. It's not wasted or radiated out. And that could keep the whole thing spinning. So I think that's probably a much more natural part of our evolution, like from the Earth's evolution, geologically, than people think. And therefore, doesn't mean that we're going to have some sort of cosmic barrage from Sedna, but it's indicating that when we see these things come in, we just discovered it. It's coming in. We should be all eyes on the sky as a result, because it's definitely like an omen of change. And how that's going to affect us, like, is it going to resonate through the archetypal field, more through like the material field? I don't know. But we see a lot of evidence of cataclysms in the past. And while they're rare in terms of like the human lifespan timescale, they still happen. And it appears to Sedna last time was kind of right in this pretty dramatic zone of like the Younger Dryas, and then all of a sudden the end of the Younger Dryas and pre-pottery Neolithic and all the Tepe culture in Turkey, and then supposedly the pyramids were built after that. I mean, there's so many unknowns as it relates to ancient history and stuff, but Sedna being in Gemini, I think there's this little narrative I just laid out. It's probably like 0.001% of that story. I don't know. I think it's crazy. I'm just like scratching the surface here, but it's my intuition is telling me there's something there, big time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Sedna moving into Gemini, I have a decent bit of Gemini in my chart, but even I'm kind of thinking, do we really need more Gemini right now?
Yeah.
We've got Uranus about to move into Gemini on July the 5th. Yeah, is it July the 5th or July the 7th? In fact, sorry. Yeah. A lot of people are talking about July the 5th, though. That's why that date popped into my mind. There's all these rumors flying around, or not even rumors, actually, reports about at least 2 psychics with some kind of proven track records. We have this Japanese manga comic writer. I think it's a woman. She wrote a manga based on visions that she had, dreams, and she predicted the 2011 Japanese tsunami in those dreams well before it actually happened. And then there's another psychic, a Thai psychic, more Pra, I believe she's called, who's also predicted in July that there may be some kind of volcanic event underneath the sea, resulting in an enormous tsunami. There's quite a lot of videos about these 2 predictions. They're both basically predicting the same thing, if I'm not mistaken, and they're predicting, or at least the Japanese psychic has singled out July the 5th for when this event is going to take place. Apparently, incoming flights to Japan have plummeted. There's a lot of people in East Asia take this stuff very seriously. And it's kind of interesting. There are quite a lot of ways he could potentially see something like that maybe being possible based on the astrology at the moment. And one of the few things I would say is Sedna being conjunct Uranus, because Sedna, if I'm not mistaken, has to do with the deep ocean. Then we have Uranus, which is, a planet we associate with sudden and violent disruption. When you put those 2 things together symbolically, actually that does match pretty well the kind of things that these psychics have been predicting. And then if we add to that, we have Saturn and Neptune together in the 1st degree of the zodiac, or the 1st and 2nd degree, let's say, at the moment, of Aries. Saturn, we have materialization, and Neptune, we have the ocean. And the 1st degree of the zodiac, we could say that's a place of birth. It's a place where new things come into the world. One of the things that the Japanese psychic has said is that this event that she's foreseen not only results in an enormous tsunami, I think 3 times bigger than the 2011 tsunami, but also results in the creation of new land, which she said would join together, I think, Japan, Philippines, parts of East Asia, which, frankly, just seems incredible and, to my mind, impossible. So we don't have to take her vision too literally, and hopefully it's just wrong. One thing that let's just start there. Like, hopefully this just doesn't happen. And one thing that I have noticed is that when these kind of prophecies are very well known, they don't tend to pan out. I can't think of one where so many people have known about it in advance and then it's then happened. There seems to be something about the nature of these things that doesn't tend to happen. It's usually that the prophecy is made quietly, not many people know about it, and then the event happens and then people look and say, oh, look at this person predicted it. That seems to happen quite regularly. But for half the internet, and maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, not everybody's into this stuff, but a lot of people to be aware of these prophecies, and then for the thing to actually happen, it doesn't seem to happen, and let's hope that does not happen. But it's interesting. I have to say, astrologically speaking, the stuff that's going on at the moment kind of says to me, like, yeah, I mean, you could see it. Let's just say that with the astrology that we have, I wouldn't say I would predict that, but you could kind of see symbolically how it actually fits, especially the kind of Saturn, Neptune, new lands being created. That part kind of symbolically fits what this psychic has foreseen. You could almost hope perhaps that maybe what is going to happen in a sort of symbolic archetypal sense, she's then reinterpreted in a kind of literal cataclysm. And perhaps what we're looking at, that's a kind of non-literal representation. So let's just hope that isn't true. I wonder what your thoughts are about that. I know you've covered it in some of your recent stuff.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, absolutely, the astrology is super resonant with like these predictions. And I just kind of came to maybe a way for us out of this in my mind. It's just an idea, but I've also been doing research. I've been doing research on all the cataclysms recently, just because these have been more important for Earth's history than a lot of people want to recognize. So I've been researching the supervolcanoes. And one of the simple things that they're starting to come to awareness of is that the movement of this felsic magma from deeper in the earth, which then causes, this movement of mafic magma, which is like basaltic, more iron rich, and it's denser. This movement of this mafic magma up causes felsic magma to then melt. And felsic magma is like more like granite based, plagioclase based. And that is lower density, is also stickier. And that's what's kind of needed for a supervolcano eruption, because there needs to be such a critical pressure that then just goes totally nuts. Whereas if it is just a felsic magma coming up, it kind of just extrudes out. Whereas the supervolcano eruptions seem to have built like this massive pressure, and then they spontaneously just boom. But the kind of prevailing thought with supervolcanoes is that they're just sitting there. It's like they're just waiting, right? But it seems, based on the geology and these really deep long-term processes, that the very act of creating a supervolcano in and of itself is the trigger for the eruption as well. And so just by having this dynamic at play will inevitably cause it to blow. And so I think about the planetesimals, and they, with the modeling that they've done and some of the evidence, it suggests that like a planetesimal impact can go down to like 600 kilometers. And also, especially if it's done obliquely, the impact's oblique, it's even more effective in the mixing. It can also spread that out 1,000-kilometer radius on either side. So you can actually have perhaps some of this outside impactor get distributed pretty deep and in a wide range in that zone of initial impact. And so if there had been perhaps a planetesimal impact in that area in the past, and then it's done this geochemical alteration and this mixing, that then could create this, because there's so much heat there and most of it's getting trapped, this could create this flow of magma from the depth that's more felsic, iron rich, because the planetesimal is rich in iron. We already talked about how the mantle is depleted in this. It was supposed to be depleted, but it's not because of the planetesimal impacts. That would cause it to be very felsic. If it did have buoyancy and rise, it could then cause that, or mafic, it could cause that felsic melting, which then is the trigger in and of itself to trigger the supervolcano eruption. And that's what could create new land. So, I mean, this is just a kind of piecing things together. And I think the chance of this actually being the case is very, very low. But it's an interesting kind of idea how these things segue from one to the next, and it makes logical sense. But the kind of aha moment I just had now, which we hope maybe this is one of the expressions or the dominant expression, is this is all happening with Saturn and Uranus and Gemini. And so Gemini is being about, Mercury and information, intellect, and perhaps the expression of this is the fact that it's causing a lot of us to do really deep research. Like, I mean, I've been doing all this deep research on that into these different things because the initial idea was put out there. And then I was looking for a potential way for that to actually happen. It's not complete lunacy, but then it doesn't happen. But the end result is that, hey, a lot of us actually really leveled up our knowledge on a variety of things. And maybe that's the expression. I don't know. Maybe that's what we should hope for.
I like that. I'd like to go with that. I've been doing a lot of deep research recently as well. It's definitely been a pretty mind-expanding time recently. And one thing that I've noticed actually, and I don't know if you've noticed this too, but Jupiter obviously has just moved into Cancer after a year in Gemini. And I think Jupiter in Gemini has really been a time when it's been quite hard to focus and on one particular topic. We've been pulled around in multiple directions, trying to expand our knowledge in every direction, a bit of this, a bit of that. And there's been a lot of questions over like, what's true, what's real, can I trust anything I'm seeing on the internet at the moment? And I don't think that's going to go away instantly with Jupiter leaving Gemini, but it definitely seemed to characterize the last year more so than times I can remember. But one thing that I found recently, and just with Jupiter leaving Gemini personally, is that I found that a lot of the reading and research and learning that I did over the past year kind of just came together as Jupiter left Gemini. It was like I finally put all the pieces together and saw the bigger picture, the whole picture that I was trying to grasp at, and it came together almost in an instant, and it felt a little bit miraculous to me. And it's inspired some new work that I'm going to be doing and that I'll probably be talking about on the channel in the future. So I'm not going to get into what it's all about now, but I don't know if you've seen that, and I wonder if some of the viewers have seen that things, there's been a sort of cohering of knowledge as Jupiter has finally left Gemini.
Yeah, I mean, definitely looking back over the past year, things have been very scattered at times as it relates to research and my endeavors, and yeah, doing 20 different things at once. And it's been great, but yeah, I guess I'm feeling the effect of Jupiter in Cancer already in a nice way. It's more calm and grounded, it seems. So I've been looking forward to this transit of Jupiter in Cancer, and in general, this next like 12 to 18 months, 24 months even, it's going to be really interesting for a variety of things. I think there's a lot of really interesting resonances as it relates to the markets, and they just released that video on that. So I'm watching that really closely, but then also like the solar activity and the geophysics, the earthquake activity. We're overdue for some like big earthquakes, and it's like, are those going to happen soon? We don't know. The volcanic activity is really interesting right now, especially like this potential volcanic eruption in between Japan and the Philippines. I think it's like the Ryukyu Trench, which is where in fact they lost a nuclear bomb. It went right overboard. So I mean, it is that July 5th story is kind of nuts. So we hope that it doesn't happen. We definitely hope it doesn't happen. But I'm kind of seeing how these things could happen. We're very, very privileged right now. Like, we're researching into volcanic winters, 1816, for example. Like, we could get a massive nuclear eruption, or not nuclear, a volcanic eruption. We could get a massive nuclear eruption, but we could get a massive volcanic eruption at any time that gives us basically famines and crop failures and more. So, we're not living in 1816, the year without a summer, or 536 AD, or the Minoan eruption, 1600. Like, we are very blessed in many ways. So it's also giving me that perspective too. Like, our home right now is actually doing much better than we think it is. It could be a lot worse.
That's it for this month's interview video in the bonus section of the members only version. Coming up next, for those who've signed up, we talk cataclysms. Thanks for watching. I've linked all the places you can find Stefan in the description below. Thanks so much to him for joining us on the channel, and I'll see you again with a new video very soon.